So I just wanted to start out with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the lands that each of us are on. So if you guys could each join me in paying your respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that you're calling in from today. For me, that's the Catawba or Iswa Nation. As I speak through a bit of an acknowledgement, I encourage each of you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the place where you are. If you'd like, you can say that. If you'd like, you can use the chat box to let us know where you're calling in from, and use that as an opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that you are calling in from. So we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're on today. I'm on the lands of the Catawba Nation, and we acknowledge their continuing connections to country. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. Many of you have probably been on a lot of Zoom calls lately. I know that I have, so you're probably very familiar with a bit of the Zoom etiquette, but I just want to start out with that so we're all kind of on the same page. First off, just want to give a quick heads up that this call is being recorded today. That's in case you want to come back and rewatch, or so that others who might not be able to join us live are able to view this. It'll be shared on YouTube and shared on social media. Everybody is automatically put on hold, put on mute as you're joining. We're going to start out by going through some prepared questions. Then we're going to open this up for any live questions that you have. Feel free to raise your hand in the chat. Feel free to enter your question in the chat. If you are up for it, we would love for you to ask your question live with your own voice. If you're not so comfortable with that, also please just feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll go through those. So today, as many of you are aware, we're celebrating World Oceans Day. This is really an opportunity for us to understand the important role that oceans have in our everyday lives. The health of marine ecosystems and human communities are intimately interconnected, and they're intimately interdependent. Oceans generate most of the air that we breathe every single day. They provide us food, and they provide us with medicine. They also stabilize the very climate of our planet, and they buffer our coastlines from some of the most devastating impacts of climate change. Globally, biodiversity of these ecosystems is under threat from human-related pressures, and as a result, human well-being is under threat. Traditional owners, scientists, ocean managers, and global citizens are working hard to find solutions to better protect and to restore our ocean's health and resilience. This year's World Ocean Day theme is Innovation for a Sustainable Ocean. Innovation is all about making changes in an established way of doing things. This could mean introducing new methods and ideas, and importantly, it can also mean re-examining the ways that things are done today to reintroduce traditional approaches that can help us do things better. Continuing on from the National Reconciliation Week theme, In This Together, today in this webinar we'll be exploring unique insights from Indigenous perspectives on threats to oceans and innovative research and management that will not only benefit these systems, but the communities that rely upon them. Before the age of COVID, which we're in now, the U.S. Consulate General in Sydney held Learn at Lunches on topics ranging from entrepreneurship to women's empowerment and political satire. And we're continuing that tradition today, but in a virtual forum. So let's get it started. So my name is Joe Pollock. I'm a scientist, an educator, and founder of an organization called Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders in Marine Science, or ATSIMS for short. ATSIMS brings people together to help fill the gap between the immense potential of young Indigenous Australians and careers in marine science and management. The program helps to support Indigenous high school students to participate in local field-based science activities to help raise awareness of key threats to coastal and marine ecosystems, and to provide hands-on community-based approaches to reef conservation. The program is designed to help bolster the interest, experience, and skills needed for students to initiate and succeed in tertiary studies and if they are so interested, in careers in marine conservation. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our esteemed panel to introduce themselves so that you guys have a little bit of so the people in our audience have an idea of who we're going to be hearing from today and who you have the opportunity to ask questions from today. I'm going to start out by handing it over to Dr. Andrew Chin.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. And nice to see everyone here. So my name's Andrew. I work at James Cook University up in North Queensland. I've been involved with the ATSIMS program since Joe, which is an interesting story, Joe, kicked the whole program off many years ago. And yeah, it's one of the highlights of my year, to be honest. And yeah, in my non-ATSIMS role, the rest of my job is basically doing fisheries research and also teaching fisheries subjects here at JCU. We've got a few projects working with Indigenous rangers up in Cape York, and it's a really fascinating experience.
Pass it over to Dr. ALANA GRECH. ALANA, you are on mute. She's got that Zoom etiquette just drilled so deeply.
Of course. Thanks very much, Joe. Thank you to the US Consulate for inviting me here. My name's ALANA GRECH. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I stand, which is in Townsville in northeast Queensland. I acknowledge the Bindal and Walbaruka peoples and pay my respects to elders past and present. I've been very fortunate to be working in this part of the country since about the mid-2000s. And in this region, I've had the privilege of working with traditional owners and government agencies such as the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority on projects to inform the conservation management of coastal species that are very important to traditional owners, including dugongs, dolphins and turtles, as well as the seagrass habitats that they use. And a large focus of my current research program is using really innovative computer models of water movement to measure how seagrasses move around the marine ecosystem in the Great Barrier Reef and Torres Strait and how well they are connected to each other. And this information is really important because it provides information to traditional owners and government on how these species can recover from large events such as cyclones and flooding, which we get up here in northeastern Australia. And I'm really keen to get the conversation started, so I'm going to hand it over to the next person.
TRACEYLEE Forrester, would you mind to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So morning everyone, I'm TRACEYLEE. I am a Lama Lama Ngawagi traditional owner. My family live in Cape York and also North Queensland. I'd like to pay respects to the Walgaruka and Bindal people for the place where I am at the moment, but also the place that I work. Also, I'd like to acknowledge my own tribes, Lama Lama and Ngawagi people. And my day job is I'm the Indigenous Partnerships Coordinator at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, AIMS. I've also work as a traditional owner advisory group with the GBR Foundation. I do director work with Lama Lama and also Ngawagi, and on the Indigenous Reference Group for FRDC, which is the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation. And I'm involved with my own people stuff as well with junior rangers. And I used to be a TOMA coordinator for Lama Lama. So yeah, have a big background in sea country, land and sea management. And yeah, also as a traditional owner. So thank you.
Thank you, TRACEYLEE. I'll pass it now to Dr. LEAH TALBOT.
Thanks, everybody. And I'd also like to thank you for the invitation to be a part of today's discussion. My name's LEAH TALBOT. I'm based here in Cairns, so I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the Yirrakanji and the Gimwe Wallabarri Dingji peoples on whose land I live and work. I am a Cookie Yalanji descendant, so I'd also like to acknowledge my elders, the Cookie Yalanji people from Far North Queensland. I currently work within the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. I've recently just moved here to the foundation. I've been a researcher with CSIRO for the past 7 years. I am a Indigenous ecological social researcher, and particularly in the areas of area management is where I've spent most of my time. I work a lot with Indigenous communities on land management and co-stewardship and co-management areas. I've also developed a lot of Indigenous-led projects with collaborative Indigenous research methodologies. I have been a director of the Wet Tropics Management Authority for the past 7 years, and I'm currently still a member of the Indigenous Advisory Committee to the Commonwealth Minister for Agriculture, Water and the Environment. So thank you all for having me along today.
Thank you, Leah. I'll pass it now to Dr. Nathan Waltham.
Thanks, Joe, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to start off by thanking and acknowledging the Indigenous nation that we are meeting. I'm in James Cook University in Townsville, so again, the Walgarugabar and the Bindal people acknowledge their leaders past, present, and the emerging leaders we have in our community. I'd like to thank the US Consulate as well for the invitation today to talk a bit about some of the work I do, which looks at those transitional coastal areas between the ocean and the land. That's where I'm focusing a lot of my research, on those connected estuaries and freshwater floodplains that provide such incredible habitat opportunities for a range of species that are culturally significant, economically, recreationally important. My projects extend right along the GBR coast, through the Gulf of Carpentaria, looking at feral pig management, the Torres Straits, working with land and sea ranges in the Torres Straits around wetlands, systems repair, water quality, habitat conditions, and more recently, how we can try and incentivize restoration. So can we actually tap into markets that will pay you to do restoration? So we're working a lot with Indigenous groups on the Cape Hill to incentivize restoration. I'm really interested in green engineering, how we modify coastlines, and can we actually strike a balance between conservation outcomes with what's inevitable going to happen, coastal development. So can we reach a balance there? So I'm really interested in green engineering, eco-engineering. And certainly catchment and waterways. That's where a lot of the contaminants start and delivered, unfortunately, to our oceans. So a lot of the work I do focuses on that in the country.
Thank you, Nathan. One final introduction before we start getting into some questions. Donald Maynard.
Hi, everyone. Not sure if you can see me, but I'm Donald from the US Consulate here in Sydney, and just very happy to be hosting this webinar today. And thank you to all of these expert scientists that we have online. Very briefly, one of the most amazing experiences that I've had in my 2 years plus here in Australia has been the honor of joining ATSIMS on Orpheus Island last year, where I was there with a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and a great group of marine scientists from James Cook University. And just seeing the eyes open of the young students as they experienced the science and the wonder of nature firsthand was amazing and moving to me. And when I spoke with one of the scientists that was there, and she was asking, why does the US Embassy and Consulate care? Why are we involved with ATSIMS? And my answer in short was, if one student a year from that group decides to pursue studying marine science at the university level, or to become involved in beach cleanups, or somehow involved in the movement to save our oceans, that's worth every penny of our involvement. And so thank you for what all of you are doing. And we're just humbled to be able to be a small part of it. That's all.
Excellent, and thank you everyone for joining us. We've got a really good group of participants on the call. We've got an amazing panel, so let's get into some questions. I'm going to start off with some that have been submitted before we got started, but I would love for each of you, as we're working on these, to be thinking about your own questions. We really want this to be addressing questions that you have, so please feel free to throw them in the chat, or just throw in your name in the chat if you'd like to have the opportunity to ask a question. So without a doubt, here on World Ocean Day, we I think we can all agree on the importance of ocean conservation, on marine conservation, and we can all recognize in no uncertain terms the important contributions that First Nations people have made to marine conservation for, in many cases, tens of thousands of years. So my question for the panelists, or the question that I'm posing to the panelists now, is how can we ensure that First Nations peoples are meaningfully engaged in ocean conservation? I might pass that first to Dr. Leah Talbot.
Thanks, Joe. Look, it's really, really important that First Nations people, our traditional owners, are involved in meaningful engagement and consultation for our oceans. People have been part of our sea country for millennia, for a very, very long time. Our observations, lived experiences all inform our traditional knowledge, our way in which we make decisions, and the way in which we look after country. It's really important to be able to engage at the very early onsets of how and what those questions are that we wish to explore when it comes to looking at the oceans. I'd also just like to say that it's really important, if where we can, is to move to a place where traditional owners are more involved in actually co-designing what those questions are and the focus of them, and looking at what's important to traditional owners as well. I feel that traditional owners, First Nations people, have been not always part of those conversations in the past, and it's a really important part that we have them at the very forefront of the discussions before we even enter our consultation phases. Other members got some comments?
I'd just really like to back what Lee is saying. I think that research in Australia is transitioning. We no longer have researchers in one box, TOs in another box, and government people in another box, and then we filter information through reports and symposia and so on to each other. We're really transitioning to a point where we must co-develop, co-design and collaborate together through the full research spectrum. That is the design of the question, the implementation of the research, and the writing of the reports, and the data sharing and so on. Research is certainly changing in Australia. We've got a long way to go before we get to the point where that actually is going to work for traditional owners and work for researchers and managers as well. But I think we're heading in the right direction, and certainly the way that government is pushing the way that research is funding at universities and through other organisations, is that is a key priority for them as well, which is good and exactly how it should be.
I'd probably support that again, and I guess in my own experience, my approach has been that including, as ALANA said, including all stakeholders on a project on the scientific outcomes. So for us as academics, publishing a paper, having the land and sea ranges actually authored on the manuscript, I've been doing that, as well as capturing the language name for fish, for example, in our wetlands. So you see in the paper that we've published recently, the scientific name, the Western name, and then also the language name as well to capture that information. That's been really effective, and particularly reaching out to schools and presenting that information back to the young scientists coming through as well.
TRACEYLEE, anything that you would like to add on that one?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Joe. I think also, like, traditional owners, like my group actually lives in a really remote area of Cape York, so research tends to be done where people are, but our communities that are in the Cape and across the top of Northern Australia and down to Western Australia, I would call them as knowledge gaps. There's not a lot of research done there at the moment, but I think if we engage with traditional owners more, then we would have an opportunity to fill in those knowledge gap areas. And also, it's an opportunity for traditional owners to do that two-way learning where they are able to impart the cultural knowledge about their own country and, talk to scientists about, the things that they've observed for millennia, and also they themselves get to understand from a scientific point of view what's happening in country as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for that two-way learning to occur, you know, where both groups are contributing to the research and to the work and to reports, and, you know, if it's, you know, conferences and stuff like that, that's a good thing, you know, and there won't be as many knowledge gaps in the future then, because Indigenous people are engaged as well.
Well, Joe, I might just add some. I've been scribbling some notes down. These are all great points, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. I guess I'd also say that, you know, how do we meaningfully work with traditional owners in marine conservation and research? The word that jumps out to me is be humble. Understand that, you know, traditional owners have been walking their country for tens of thousands of years. How do we engage them in marine conservation? Well, they're already engaged in marine conservation. I mean, the viewpoint of how they interact with the marine environment and their natural country is just so different from a Western point of view. So recognizing that that conservation is already part of the intrinsic way the community operates. And like Tracy was saying, that two-way learning, being humble to come in as a scientist who's willing to learn, who doesn't know it all, and is genuinely interested in taking on board the community's interests and their knowledge. I think that's going to go a long way to building a relationship where you're working successfully together and traditional owners are being able to showcase the marine conservation that they are doing, but also build up their own skills within their community in terms of marine conservation in a modern scientific political context. The other thing I guess I'd say is, you know, one of my favorite projects is one where the traditional owners actually came to me and said, well, we need this done. And for those of you who know me, I work on fish and sharks, right? I know zero about shellfish, mussels, like nothing. But that's what they wanted to do. So we found a way to do it. I had to fly a mussel expert in from Western Australia to get it done. But it delivered real impacts for that community, like information that they could use. And the elders wanted to know about it. I mean, we didn't even know what species it was. So I guess having that humility to go, okay, I'm working with these guys on their country. They want to know about mussels. Okay, it's an opportunity for me to learn about mussels and put aside all the shark and fish stuff, which I really like. And you know what? Who knew? Mussels are really interesting and tasty.
Excellent. So a lot of really good insights there, and important considerations on how we can do this work in a better, more thoughtful, more meaningful way. I'm seeing we're starting to get some questions coming in the chat. Please keep those coming. We've got a couple more questions that were developed before we started here, which we'll go through, but please keep those questions coming in the chat, or let us know if you'd like to ask one live. The next question that we'd like to explore a little bit is the role of youth in marine conservation. What do the panelists believe that the role of youth can and should be? And, you know, that could be youth, Indigenous or non-Indigenous youth, and or the role of junior rangers, which is a group that we've had the great privilege of, that I've had the great privilege of getting to know a few of, and have been a huge inspiration for me. Does anybody want to get us started with that one?
All right, I'll jump in. I mean, look, you know,
Andrew's not shy. I like it.
It's really exciting. Like, I love this program, and when you're working with the kids from community, and you know, they're engaged and they're interested, and it's really rewarding. Why is that so important? Obviously, those kids are the leaders of the future, and you know, it's interesting to see when we have a lot of events and stuff, the emphasis that the rangers have on bringing the kids together so the kids experience and learn and have the opportunity to see what rangers do and what pathways might be. I think for communities, it's having those kids involved is really, really important. I guess also with the kids, it's an opportunity to reach the adults, right? You know, I know there's one project that was done on Groote Island, and to get an idea of what fishing activity was, they made it a school project, and that was done with the Land and Sea Rangers. And you know, the kids basically through their homework collected data for the community on what the community was, how the community was using marine resources. You know, if you went and tried to do that with a bunch of adults out fishing, I don't know if you would have had anywhere near the success. But you know, kids can be that conduit to yeah, reach their parents, their uncles, and their aunties.
Tracy, yeah,
Yeah.
would you like, okay.
So, so everyone who knows me knows that I'm really passionate about, you know, skilling up our youth to be future leaders, you know, and the Junior Ranger program does that. Unfortunately for me, I've been involved in the ATSIMS program too at AIMS over the last couple of years. And so, you know, that was a really good experience for me to see that, you know, all these grade 10 children who were coming from the surrounding communities down here were just so engaged in science, you know. And I think, you know, when we live in Cape York and we're in remote areas, you know, we do our Junior Ranger program, but, you know, not every child wants to be a ranger, you know. So it actually also gives us the opportunity to tell our children that, you know, if you want to do land and sea management, you can, and you can have these other roles to play, you know, whether that's in governance or whether it's as a marine biologist or whether it's as a ranger, you know. So it kind of opens up our worlds to more possibilities about what we're trying to do, you know, as people who are living off the land. But the other thing I wanted to say with Junior Ranger programs, you know, the Lama Lama Junior Ranger program actually mirrored what the Lama Lama Big Rangers were doing, if you could talk like that, you know. So if the Big Rangers were doing, you know, bird surveys, then the Junior Rangers did bird surveys, you know, and we engaged our children at the primary school level, the high school level, and then as young adults, you know. So in-house, we were building future rangers in this case, but, you know, those kind of skills can be adopted into another set where they go to university or something like that. So, you know, I think if we have the opportunity to invest in our children, then we should do that, you know. And I think that other people should support us, as in institutions, to, you know, grow children that are going to be strong in STEM, you know, because we will all benefit from it in the long run.
Do any of the other panelists want to? Yeah, please, Leah.
Yeah, I'll say a few words on that one. I absolutely agree. Our junior students and junior ranger programs are absolutely essential to ensuring that we have the next generation coming forward and our next set of leaders moving forward. And I think it's also important for our students who are even facing or are disengaging from society and from school and education and their communities as well. I've been a supporter and a sponsor of a program that brought a group of young Indigenous students from Mount Isa to the coastal region. And the first time that these students seen the ocean and seen fish, it was absolutely amazing to see the reaction on their faces and the joy and the willing to want to learn and understand a completely different environment that they were exposed to is invaluable. And just by then sitting down and talking to them about what animals and what species, what mammals, what fish, what birds are in their environments as opposed to the more coastal environment, you can start to understand that they can see there's a whole range of different people, there's a whole range of different environments that they need to understand better and that's out there, and just exposing them to new experiences, I think, produces just a world of opportunities for students to take forward in their life. And if there's, I think, you know, you said before, Joe or Nathan, if there's just one of those students that come out and say, well, this is the way that I want to move forward and I want to take up some of these opportunities, then I think us as a society has really achieved what we've set out to do.
Something really important to be said for sparking the inquisitive nature that's just kind of inherent in all of us, isn't there? Any of the other panelists want to chime in on that? And then I'm going to open it up to some of the audience contributed live questions. It looks like Nathan's got something to contribute.
I think, Jay, just I think one small thing I'll throw out there. I agree with what's been spoken about, absolutely. I think if you can also embrace technology as well, kids these days, the youth these days are far more technologically advanced than I am. My 10-year-old daughter showed me how to attach a GIF to a text the other day with a dancing happy person. I didn't know how to do that. But I think there's it's an amazing opportunity now to connect the science now with digital platforms. And that's what motivates kids. I think there's a really important and exciting link between that. And that seems to, from at least my travels, is a great way to engage and connect with the youth. If you can show them that you can do all this cool science, but bring in science technology to do that, I think that's a wonderful way to inspire them to move forward.
I might just pick up on that point, Nathan. I think that's really important. It goes back to also something that TRACEYLEE was talking about is, you know, this business of science and research and marine conservation isn't just counting things. There's a whole range of skills that you need in terms of computing, imaging, videographing, video production, digital media, graphic art, and then engineering. And if we can use these things as ways to inspire kids and open up that whole range of STEM-related opportunities and skills, I mean, there's real opportunities, I think, for us to pique their interest. And Joe, I can't remember if which cohort this was, but I remember that there were 2 kids when we took them to AIMS as part of the ATSIMS program and the CSIM, and they weren't interested in fish at all, which I found really disappointing. But they loved pumps and pipes and all of that other stuff. And I remember one of the ATSIMS, their teacher a couple of years later said, "You remember those 2 kids? Yeah, they weren't interested in fish at all, but they loved the physics and the pumps." And apparently they both went, you know, they started paying attention in maths and physics, and they're now doing an engineering degree in University of Sydney, apparently. So I think, you know, we need to be very conscious that there's a whole range of things that the kids can get out of this. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to engage with these kids early on, because there is so many things that they can do. We just need to create the opportunities for them to get interested and get that spark. And it could be graphic design, it could be fish biology.
That's very big of you, Andrew, to acknowledge that not everyone in the world is as passionate about fishes as you are. So I appreciate that humbleness. Yeah, no, I mean, I've had the same experience when sometimes it's putting up a drone in the air, right? And some students will see that and be blown away, or it's just connecting with one of the elders or one of the scientists who's there. And, you know, everybody looks at the world in a different way, and that's a beautiful thing. And giving people an opportunity to explore the things that spark their interests is what we all need to, I believe, aspire to. Anybody else want to add on to that? If not, I'm going to open it up to Chloe. Had a question here that I'll give an opportunity. Chloe, I've just unmuted you, so you should be able, or I've quote allowed you to talk, so you should be able to now unmute yourself and ask us your question if you would be so kind.
Yeah, that just came from nowhere. Thank you very much. And so far, this has been really fantastic. And yeah, great insight. And thank you all for sharing so far. I have a bit of a kind of left of field question. I'm usually based in Beijing, and there I'm studying consumer attitudes to cultured meat. So we don't really say lab-grown meat, but lab-grown meat, if you've heard of that. And in Hong Kong and Singapore, there are companies that are developing cultured fish meat. So that's where you grow fish meat in a laboratory and you don't need to have the fish. I was kind of wondering from your perspective, how do you feel about rising amounts of fishing in Australia to feed large markets in Asia? What's a sort of viable and holistic approach that would include Indigenous governance and perspectives to ocean and marine management that allows us to reap value from some of our natural wealth in seafood in a sustainable way? And what are alternatives if there isn't a really clear, sustainable way to do that?
Thank you for the softball question, Chloe. We really wanted to include
Sorry to kick off with something.
No, it's great. It's great. Did the panelists get that, or would it be useful to ask Chloe to give us that one more time? One more time. All right, Chloe, can you give us the question? Great background on the approaches with the not lab-grown meat. Can you just ask us the question aspect of that one more time, just so we can make sure that our panelists have it crystal clear in their heads?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a couple of questions, so apologies for that. I was just wondering how each of you feel about rising amounts of fishing in Australia to feed large markets in Asia, and what's potentially a more viable and holistic approach to that would include Indigenous perspectives and governance to ocean and marine management, so that we can reap value from our wealth of sort of fisheries and seafood, but in a sustainable way. And if there isn't a really clear sustainable way, what are some alternatives? I hope that made it slightly less heavy.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. Well, I might. Who wants to take a first crack at this one? If not, I'm going to pick on our resident admitted fish guy to kick us off on this one. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I could see that one coming. Thanks, Chloe. Hey, interesting question. I guess so. Australia does import quite a bit of seafood to consumers in Southeast in Asia. If you look at the latest status of the Australian fish stocks report, Australia is actually doing pretty well in terms of its fishery sustainability, right? We don't have a lot of species that we are overfishing. That said, the export market to Asia is still really, really important. You know, this is typically for higher value fish like coral trout, anything that is worth the money or economically viable, I guess, to send all that distance overseas, because exporting fish is quite important. Quite expensive. So there are certain segments of the market that are very, very heavily dependent on Southeast Asia for to operate. There aren't a huge amount of sustainability concerns with things like coral trout yet. There are some warning signs, but I guess that has to be balanced between how much domestic use there is and also how much recreational use there is, and also everything else that's happening, such as coral bleaching and what's happening with the habitat that the fish are living in. So I guess that leads me into the second question. How do traditional owner, what are opportunities for traditional owners here in terms of, I guess, participation in the fishery, or to promote sustainability in terms of how we use these resources? There aren't a lot of traditional owners who are operating in the fishery. I think that there are opportunities that there could be, something I'd certainly like to see more. And for example, in the Torres Strait, the Spanish mackerel, there are traditional owned Spanish mackerel fisheries there. There's also a crayfish fishery, and the Torres Strait Islander traditional owners are very, very heavily involved in those fisheries. I think it would be nice to see that more widespread through the rest of the East Coast. But that's another story. what I think I would really like to see, though, is some of these ideas about how traditional owners have managed their fisheries become much more prevalent in our understanding and thinking in the way we see the world and try and manage it. You know, there's a Professor Sean Olm at James Cook University in Cairns has been doing some amazing work with traditional owners, looking at into middens and historical bones, and basically looking at the size, like through thousands and thousands of years, the size of shells and bones in these middens has not changed. People found the sustainable sizes and sustainable limits, and they were fishing that way for tens of thousands of years. And that I think is a massively important lesson that we could try and bring and make more prominent in the way we manage our fisheries now. So that's my attempt to answer those two.
I mean, I can add just something to, oh, sorry, no, you go, Leah.
Oh, sorry, Alana.
As the moderator, I'll say Leah came off of mute first.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Alana. I'll just add a couple of points for consideration too. Great question, Chloe. I think it's really innovative and out there thinking about it. I'll particularly pick up on a few points in your questions where you drew about Indigenous governance and Indigenous perspectives. And I note your question in the chat box line too about best way to build trust with Indigenous communities. I think it's about starting those conversations really early, you know, really starting to build a level of trust with individuals, starting a relationship with individuals. It's going to be quite a long relationship to have with traditional communities, understanding what they value, understanding their importance to their communities, also understanding their rights and interests in that space. I think in particular, you know, thinking about a viable holistic approach to the community, understanding in particular when it comes to Indigenous governance, there's multiple layers of Indigenous governance and how knowledge, our Indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge does affect and support our governance systems. It is a system of governance, and recognising that we have our own customary governance systems in place. We also have our national state governance system, so our non-Indigenous governance systems that we work to and abide by. And there is a or a shared governance arrangement system that often comes into play as well. So recognising that there can be multiple governance systems that come into place, and that brings in different types of perspectives from Indigenous peoples. I wanted to just quickly touch on, you know, understanding the importance of some of the international conventions that play in this area and our national conventions, particularly the Sustainable Development Goals, recognising the importance of supporting those types of approaches when it comes to our Indigenous communities, understanding UNDRIP, our United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, benefit sharing arrangements that come from Nagoya Protocols. And these are the types of things that I'd really encourage you to look into if you haven't already, that is, particularly the CBD and Article 8J that talks about traditional knowledge, innovation and practices. Finding ways that you can recognise the way in which Indigenous communities already practice in this space, and finding a way to protect that knowledge as you move through that research would be my suggestions to you. But thank you, Chloe.
Thank you, Leah. That was a fantastic answer. Would anyone else like to add on to that one? We've got a couple more questions in the chat, but I want to make sure that our panelists who would like to speak to this one have the opportunity to do so. Yeah, Alana, yes.
You know, I'd just like to, you know, Leah said it way better than me, but I'd just like to reiterate the importance of Indigenous Australians in Northern Australia. I mean, Northern Australia, they have Indigenous Australians have explicit rights over 45% of Northern Australia, and they have interests over all of Australia, right? So, you know, innovative solutions to sustainable fisheries and sustainable aquaculture provide potentially a wealth creation and an opportunity for economic participation for Indigenous communities throughout Northern Australia. So instead of seeing fisheries and aquaculture necessarily as a risk, we should be viewing these things as with Indigenous communities as a potential opportunity as well, if done correctly, appropriately and sustainably.
Thank you, Alana. I'm gonna jump to the next question here, which is from Charlotte, who asks, what is the best way to build trust with Indigenous communities who may have been let down by researchers, developers, and/or government in the past? I'll read that one more time. So it's about how to build trust with Indigenous communities who may have been let down by researchers, developers, or government in the past. Would anyone like to kick us off on that one? Leah, please.
Okay, I'll have a go at a few points. Great question again. I think Andrew used the word that is really important much earlier on. It's about being humble. It's about being respectful. And I think it's about being honest and truthful when starting relationships and conversations with Indigenous peoples. I think it's important that we acknowledge and we recognise that the past hasn't been smooth riding with our governments, with our researchers, with our institutions at all. We have to come to a point where we can talk about these things, where we can be honest about them, and we can acknowledge that there has been not always good outcomes. We also need to hear people's stories. I think it's really important to hear lived experiences. People will have lots of very heartfelt stories about their grandmothers or grandfathers where they shared their traditional knowledge with researchers, where they shared their experiences with governments and they weren't heard, or they were taken in the wrong manner and they were used in the wrong way. I think it's really important to find ways that we can accept and acknowledge and also protect those stories and really support people to promote their stories and be part of the conversation. I think that's really the start of building a very honest and truthful relationship. For you as an individual, I think it's always important to be who you are, be honest, because my experience is a lot of Aboriginal people can see straight through you, you know, and they really need to know that you're genuine, you're there with a good heart, and you're there to listen and you're there to learn. So that would be my suggestions in the first instance.
Excellent suggestions, excellent insights in all aspects of life. TRACEYLEE, please contribute your thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, no, I agree with Leah wholeheartedly. You know, AIMS, if I could just speak about AIMS, you know, I've been in the position with AIMS for the last 2 years, you know, and we have developed our Indigenous Partnerships Plan, you know, and we kind of have drawn a line in the sand saying for the past 47 years, AIMS has, you know, done their research on sea country, you know, mostly without traditional owner involvement. But today, or in these last 2 years particularly, you know, they drew the line in the sand saying we will now, you know, consult with traditional owners, we will move forward, we will do our science better, we'll do it that two-way learning, you know, and it kind of needs a whole of organisation, you know, change from our leadership team, filtered all the way down to, you know, our researchers that are on the ground, you know, wholeheartedly, you know, embracing this new way we're going to do business. And I think one of the things that I've lovingly coined at AIMS is what I call confessions of a scientist, you know, so we actually go back into the communities and we talk to them about, you know, the things that we've done over the last 45 years and say, you know, this is the research that we have done. You know, you have access to it, you know, that truth telling that Leah is talking about, you know, getting it out there, saying that we did this process in the past, but we're not going to do this anymore, you know, and apologize for how we used to do our work in the past. But, you know, we do have this line now. We will say that we will consult with traditional owners and we will get the consent. And if we don't get the consent, then we don't do the work, you know, but it means that people have to have their mouth and their feet pointing in the same direction, you know, and luckily for AIMS and where I work, you know, it goes from the top, right, our CEO, right down to our researchers that we have all embraced this new way of doing business. And I think, you know, as more organizations get used to the fact that they have to engage with traditional owners, you know, because I think, you know, we've spent the last 28 years doing, you know, land claims and stuff like that. So in the future, seaplanes will come on board, you know, and then, you know, if we get into this, you know, this habit, I guess, or, you know, this way of understanding that traditional owners are people that are not stakeholders, but an actual group of people that need to be spoken to about doing any work on sea country, that is a good thing.
Would anyone else like to add to that? We've got a few more questions here, but I want to make sure if anyone else wants to add on to that one, that they have the opportunity. Okay.
I might just add
Andrew.
one more thing. So that from the researcher perspective, I mean, as Leah and Tracy said, you know, it's that humility and that trust and that openness. You got to show up as well. Okay, that means you need to plan in the time and the budget to go and talk to people before things kick off. That takes effort and time. Just calling someone up on the phone and going, oh, blah, 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 this is my project, you know, do you want to be involved? I think a phone call or an email is only going to get you this far. I think if you really, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy or Leah, my feeling from my experience is that if you actually show up, take the time to fly somewhere or drive somewhere and show up and meet the people, meet the elders, that's a very big indication to them that you are genuine and you are not just going to waste their time and try and get something from them for free. So I think you got to show up.
Yeah, definitely, Andrew, that is correct. And, you know, and the other thing is that, you know, when you start a project, you know, it's good to show up in the beginning, but it's good to show up throughout the project as well. You know, we call it parachute researching, where you just drop in, have a moment, and then you go again, and we see a report in 2 years' time or something like that. You know, we got to get away from that way of doing business. You know, if researchers come on country, then they show up in the beginning, they show up in the middle, they show up at the end. You know, and I think that's a good way of doing business with traditional people.
We've got about 6 more minutes, and I wonder if we might be able to get through 2 more questions. I'm going to open it up. Libby, hello Libby, has asked a question in the Q&A, but I have just opened the chat up to her, so she should be able to ask us her question live. Hi, Libby.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep, great. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks to all panelists. Really interesting webinar. My question is about knowledge sharing and I guess knowledge management, because sometimes we hear a lot about co-design and the blending of traditional knowledge with Western science. And so my question is, how can we ensure that in doing all of this wonderful two-way learning, we're not actually posing a risk to the integrity of traditional knowledge systems? That's it.
Fantastic question. Did everybody on the panel get that? Would we like Libby to ask again, or we're feeling pretty understanding? Okay. Would anyone like to have a first crack at that question about how we can make sure that the two-way learning doesn't pose a risk to the integrity of the traditional knowledge systems? Okay. I see Leah nodding her head, and based on the fantastic answers she's given us in the past, I want to kick it off to her.
I'll have another go at this one too. Thanks, great question again. I think it's really important to recognise and build into the work about free, prior and informed consent. And each one of those individual words have a very specific meaning and set of procedures and practical steps that need to be considered. Data sharing agreements, considering intellectual property agreements, and understanding consent and permission, and that this needs to happen at all stages of the conversation, of the research. It's not something that just happens at the beginning for you to commence research. It's something that happens all throughout. So Nathan touched on much earlier about co-developing and co-authoring publications. That's another intersecting moment where we go back and we talk to traditional owners about their consent, their permission, their input, their consultation into those papers. Recognising that together we're learning, but recognising together we're developing a shared platform of knowledge. being very clear with people about, you know, the knowledge or the traditional knowledge that one group, the traditional owners, might bring to the conversation, and the other that our researchers bring to it. So very clearly acknowledging that there's two sets of knowledge systems that's coming together here, and that we put in place points to be able to recognise it appropriately and points to be able to protect it efficiently. Thanks, Libby.
That was a great answer. Thanks, Leah.
Would any of the other panelists like to add anything to that question?
Oh, I would just like to, you know, once again, you know, I keep going after Leah, and she keeps giving the best answers. And I guess what Andrew was saying before that and what Leah just said now are two really important things, right? So in engaging and doing research as a researcher with traditional owners means turning up. It means creating much longer term relationships than perhaps scientists and personal relationships that scientists are not necessarily comfortable doing. And it also means being really honest about how you're doing your research and developing research partnership agreements, understanding the ethics of what you're doing. And this can put some researchers off, right? Because it seems like a lot of work to do all of this stuff. But the benefit for researchers by going through this is immeasurable, and the benefit for communities as well. And so I don't want researchers to go, oh, it's just too hard, I'm just going to keep, you know, counting fish in the lab because I don't want to, it seems like it's going to take a lot of time. I really hope that people understand that there's so many direct and indirect benefits of doing research this way. There will be no regrets. It's fantastic to do co-develop, co-design research with traditional owners. But you have to do it properly.
I might just also chime in there. It's, you know, we got to remember that arranger groups are busy, right? They have to opt in and choose very carefully which projects they opt in and opt out from. So, you know, if you are interested in working somewhere and you know that there's traditional owners who have, you know, it's their country, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to have to do all this stuff. I mean, at the least, they should be made aware and given the opportunity to opt in or opt out. And that way, at least you're having a discussion and they know what's happening on their country, at the very least. But, you know, if they decide not to engage with you or pick your project as something they're going to do, I mean, that's fine too. They're busy as well. And in terms of, you know, how would that interaction threaten traditional knowledge? I think there's actually an opportunity here. If traditional knowledge can be recognized by scientists properly, that shows value not only to the community, but to the scientific community, that this stuff is important and needs to be preserved and protected and maintained.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask the panelists, we're at time. There's one more question in here. You can give me a quick thumbs up, thumbs down if you want to have one more quick question. Feel free to thumbs down, medium thumbs. ALANA may have to roll, and in that case, let me give a huge thank you to ALANA. If the rest of you can hang out for just one more minute, I'm bad. I feel bad. I always want to do one more thing. But huge thank you to ALANA.
It was a pleasure to be here. It was an honor to be here. And it was wonderful to listen to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ALANA. All right, final question for the panelists. Could you just give us an idea of where you feel the biggest gaps are in Indigenous, this is a question from Marshall. Could you give us an idea of where you feel the biggest gaps are in Indigenous youth training in regards to careers and or investment in marine science and management? And while the panelists are thinking on that, I will say, if anyone needs to pop off, please feel free to. They wanted me to encourage you to complete the survey that you'll get when you pop off of the call to help make these better. But yeah, do any of the panelists have thoughts on where there may be gaps in Indigenous, or I would say non-Indigenous, any kind of youth training with regards to careers and investments in marine science and management? I think Leah is penning another fantastic response for us, so I may give her a second. TRACEYLEE, do you have any thoughts on that one that you might want to share, or I can pass it to anybody else?
Yeah, I think like when I started, or when we first started talking, you know, I always said that there was knowledge gaps, you know, particularly in Northern Australia, you know, because, you know, contributing effect, I guess, is that, you know, Indigenous people live in remote areas, you know, so I think training of Indigenous community members or a range of people, you know, would be a good way to, you know, cover the monitoring gaps that we have, you know, about Northern Australia in particular, because that's where AIMS works, you know. And so, you know, I think if there's an opportunity for people to have that training, you know, in integrated monitoring practices, you know, standard operating practices, and, you know, that should happen, you know, and as more range of groups and more communities come online, you know, I think that's AIMS' vision, is that we work more heavily with Indigenous communities, you know, to fill in these knowledge gaps, you know. Then a part of that is that two-way learning that we have to do, you know, as science people and as traditional owner people, so that we can have, you know, that word robust, you know, research that's happening on sea country. So I'm not sure if I've answered Marciel's question, but I think, you know, training definitely needs to happen. You know, we need to have knowledge systems that recognize both sides, you know, both the research side and both the traditional owners side, you know, about what we're trying to do, and, you know, have a whole of country report that, you know, actually says what's happening, you know. So training, thumbs up all the time, you know, we need more training, more opportunities for it.
Yeah, Nathan, please.
Yeah, thanks, TRACEYLEE. I was thinking exactly the same thing, but I guess just to add a bit more to that, I was thinking, you know, there's a cost associated with that. And at least in my program of work, you know, the funding rounds that we have access to are never long enough. You know, we start to get some momentum in a community, Torres Straits, for example, or on the Western Cape, some of my work with around feral pigs, but you know, the funding's only for a short period of time, and you just start to build momentum, and, you know, you generate interest, and you're building that capacity, but you still need to remain in contact there. And it's hard with the funding cycles, which is continually diminishing. The flip side to that, I think there's a huge opportunity to connect with market mechanisms that are coming online now. So fire regimes and carbon payments. I think, you know, things like that, getting really creative with how you can secure funding, income, and diversify and spending that money on training and continuing to invest into your local community. I think there's some really exciting conversations and opportunities, I think, emerging right now in that space.
Excellent. Yeah, Leah's ready, I believe.
Thanks, Joe. Great question again, Marshall. I think I'd just add to what Nathan and TRACEYLEE have just shared with you. I think it does come down to some of the gaps really are that it comes down to the opportunities that are presented and that are available to our youth that are out there. Accessibility. I think accessibility is a really important one. Accessibility to role models, to see people who have gone through these similar pathways and have got to where they are. Accessibility to reasonably costed courses. You know, we can't put expensive courses in front of our youth who are really struggling to get on the pathway that they really want to follow. Location-wise too, so accessibility to ones that are recognised and supported in appropriate and different locations. TRACEYLEE talked about our more remote communities. Maybe if there's courses that are specifically designed in more remote locations, we could gather together quite a few youth to support that youth and the rollout of those courses. I think also supporting and mentoring throughout those courses and training opportunities. It's one thing to get our youth onto these pathways, but to then expect them to get down that pathway on their own is a huge ask. I think we need to be able to build more support and mentoring around our youth to be successful and get through those courses and come out the other end. And then really applicability to real case studies. You know, how does it work in practice? And TRACEYLEE touched on that. You know, how do we then showcase how these things apply in the communities and work within our communities and with our ranger groups, our elders, but even more generally out in the broader community, you know, how does that apply and work on the ground? So, thanks.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
A lot of great points. Before Andrew, I'll just say absolutely. I'm a big fan of the last one you said there about the applicability, right? We're so often like taught this idea that science and conservation is just this thing that's a table in a textbook when you're growing up, and that I think turns a lot of people off. And having the opportunities to see what this actually is, what it actually entails, whether it's being into fish or being into pumps, there's a role for diverse people, diverse perspectives, diverse interests, and still with the same goal of preserving these systems and the benefits that they provide to people. Sorry, Andrew, please.
No, I just strongly agree with what Leah, I guess, was saying there. And, you know, the words I've sort of scribbled down are opportunity, accessibility, and support. You know, I think it would be amazing to see an ATSIMS student end up doing marine science at James Cook University, graduating, going on to postgraduate work, and then working back in their community as a marine scientist in a professional sense. I think that would be amazing. But there are some real barriers there. You know, Leah mentioned cost. So, you know, we can make the opportunity, we can switch our ATSIMS kids onto opportunity, but we have to put in the support. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of helping marshal that support so that they can actually access these courses. And then once they're in, that it's supported. And then, you know, we all know how hard it is to get a job once you've done your PhD, or how hard it is to get a PhD. That support needs to go all the way through, and even back to providing support for a postdoc, an Indigenous postdoc in marine science, to work in their community. So there's a whole chain of support that's needed there. And yeah, we've got a long way to go, I think, to making that happen. But we're starting. We're starting.
Got to start somewhere. Well, thank you, everybody. Apologies for going over by 10 minutes. And thank you for our participants. Many of you are still with us, which is a big testament to your interest in this topic, and really to the depth and expertise and perspectives that this panel is bringing and sharing with us today. So I'd like to thank the attendees for joining us, for staying with us. I'd like to thank the panelists, and if anyone wants to give a thank you to them as well in the chat, please feel free to do so. We know that everybody has a lot going on, and yeah, I think that this is just a testament to everybody on this panel about how passionate you are about this work and how passionate you are about this field to take the time to share your expertise and your perspectives with everybody on the call today. So yeah, just gonna wrap it up by saying thank you again. They wanted me to make a note that as you're leaving, there'll be a survey if you want to fill that out. And on a closing note, I'm not sure if any of the panelists want to leave us with any closing thoughts or ideas or anything like that before we wrap up, but I'd like to provide space for that if so.
I'd just like to say thank you to all of my mentors in this space. I wasn't born knowing anything really about, when I came to Australia, I didn't know anything about traditional owners and Indigenous communities. So Karen Gerhardt, Liz Wren, TRACEYLEE Forster, Peter Ross, Larissa and Michael Hale, and Gavin and Tarquin Singleton. These are some of the people who've really had a big impact on me. And you don't know, so you have to learn. And I'd just like to acknowledge all of those people who have giving me the opportunity to learn. So thank you.
Nathan, Leah, TRACEYLEE. If not, no pressure. I just want to, if you, okay, TRACEYLEE is good.
No, I think it's just been a wonderful discussion, and I would hope to think it doesn't stop here, that we do continue these kinds of discussions moving forward. There's some great points raised, energy's there, let's keep it going.
Likewise, Joe, I just wanted to say thanks to the organisers for the invitation to participate in today's conversation. Really critical points of conversation that need to be had and move forward in the future. Thank you all to the panellists and the listeners online as well. Thanks.
I'm muted. All right, yeah, big thank you in conclusion to the Consulate General of the United States in Sydney. Big supporters of ATSIMS from nearly the start, and thank you again for making the space for us to have this conversation and reflecting what's already been said. Hopefully this is the beginning, or one in a series of many conversations to help us keep these initiatives moving forward. So with that, thank everybody so much. Have a great day. I'm going to bed, but everyone have a fantastic ocean day.